I first was introduced to Walter Williams when I saw him on television. It was in the, I believe, spring of 1981.
Professor Williams is saying, among other things, that perhaps the Great Society programs and the whole idea of government as father or paternal has not been in the best interests of all people, minorities.
And then Walter said a statement that I will never forget. He said to Phil Donahue, he said, "Phil, who owns you? Who owns your life?" He said, "John Locke asked this question centuries ago, and I ask you and everybody in this audience, who owns your life?" Right then and there, I said, "Oh, I love this guy. Who is this guy?" I didn't know who he was. I didn't even know his name at the time. Then they flashed Dr. Walter Williams, George Mason University, under his picture on the TV.
The reason why slavery is immoral, or rape or murder is immoral, because it violates private property. And so if you start with the idea of self-ownership, then you can say, well, what is moral and what is immoral?
So food stamps cause illegitimate babies then, huh?
No. Sexual intercourse does.
Walked into class and stood at the podium, right there in front of a little raised area, and there sprawled on in front of me, like that, was this big black fellow. He had shark's teeth, necklaces, and tiger teeth and stuff. But I asked him why he was in class, and why he was here. And he just said he wanted to learn some economics. And so I said, well, you've come to the right place.
Oh, that was summer of 1969. I was teaching summer school at UCLA, and this big tall guy comes walking into my office and saying that people had told him that his ideas were similar to mine. And so the novelty of that was always was something in itself. And so we started talking. And I guess I didn't see him again until the following year when I came back as a regular faculty member, and he was still working on his doctorate.
I said, well, do you do your work thoroughly? And when you study? I just started a conversation. And he said, oh yes. And when I was in the Army, I was asked to paint a Army truck green. I painted it green. He said the seats, the headlights, the tires, whatever you name, it was all green, the steering wheel. And I said, well, you're a man of his word, you do what you want. I said, well, see, you do the same in this class, you know. And that's truly what he did.
At UCLA, they gave me inspiration to think with my brain instead of my heart. That was probably maybe the beginning of my switching from one kind of radical to another.
He and Tom Sowell, between them, have been the two most effective proponents of the idea that what we need is a colorblind society. That they object just as much to having things done for them as they do to being able to do things to other people. They just want to be left alone and be allowed to pursue their own objectives and values.
The people who are for discrimination are also against markets because they know markets tend to be colorblind.
He just got good analytical abilities, and I don't know how else to describe it other than some have it and some don't. And he had it. You know, he was a good person to have in class and ask other students a question which they couldn't answer very well. So I was simply, Walter, can you answer it? So explain it to them. And he would do that. And so he became a part teacher in that class, whether he knew it or not.
When I go to my grocer and I buy a gallon of milk for $3, I say, look, if you will give me title to that gallon of milk, I will give you title to this $3. I will exchange these titles. So the essence of exchange is the transfer of property rights.
There's only a finite amount of everything here on earth. There's a finite amount of coal, there's a finite amount of land, there's a finite amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. Now, scarcity is to be distinguished from shortages. Shortages are something that happens because government imposes price controls or other kinds of regulations. So shortages can be eliminated by raising the price, or surpluses can be eliminated by lowering prices. But you can never get rid of scarcity. Scarcity is that punishment that was imposed upon us when we disgraced ourselves in the Garden of Eden.
He's willing to speak his mind. He doesn't equivocate. You never have any doubt about where he stands. And the positions he takes are clear and simple and appeal to a very wide range of people. They also make him strong enemies, because people who feel strongly the other way are very much upset by hearing the position they disagree with expressed so clearly and so effectively as Walter expresses it.
A lot of people will say, well, the minimum wage is an anti-poverty device. Well, that is utter nonsense. It doesn't even pass the smell test. Because if it were an anti-poverty device, well then instead of spending all this money on foreign aid, we just have our experts at the State Department tell Bangladesh, well, you could be rich like we are, just have a higher minimum wage.
As many of you know, Walter has been a regular guest host in my award-winning radio program. You know, Walter has a direct way of saying common sense things that many times set people on edge. It's why he's a favorite of my listening audience.
The welfare state has done to black Americans what slavery could not have done, Jim Crow and the harshest racism could not have done, namely to destroy the black family. Many people believe that the route to economic power is to have political power. And there's absolutely no evidence to support that.
Government cannot create a special privilege for one American without simultaneously creating a special disadvantage for some other American.
The phrase, "takes no prisoners," should have been invented to describe Walter Williams.
I was a radical in terms of the civil rights movement. I was not a supporter of Martin Luther King, but more a supporter of Malcolm X.
You don't have to scratch your head and say, I wonder what Walter's really saying, what he really means.
My recollections are so extensive, I may have confused your debut with that of some other students, but I never have confused you with other students. You were a joy to have as a student. My daughter Arlene, then a student in that class, benefited from study sessions with you. She learned the truth that students learn from their fellow students, not the professor.
I came across Dr. Williams's writings. I was sitting in my office at Monsanto reading his arguments or his writings on medallions, on South Africa, on some other things, vouchers, etc. Through Professor Soule and Dr. Williams, I became familiar with Hayek and more familiar with Milton Friedman. Dr. Williams, thank you for all your work, your insights, and your courage. You helped to free me from the bondage of group thinking. Your independence gave me courage to assert my own. Your example led me not to follow you, but to think for myself and to have the courage of my convictions.
I got invitations to testify in Congress on various aspects of labor economics and other topics as well, on taxation, on welfare, and I used to get in some very kind of nasty arguments with congressmen because I don't have the level of respect for congressmen that many people have.
My name is Dr. Walter Williams, and I'm an economist. I have spent much of my life studying the causes of poverty. I broke out of the North Philadelphia ghetto nearly 30 years ago, and so did most of my friends. But today, fewer young blacks are escaping places like this. The government is the culprit. It is the government with its hundreds of billions of dollars. It is the government with its thousands of programs.
It is the government with its endless good intentions.
And summing up the welfare state, he said, and corporate welfare, he says, it creates a dependent class in our country. We've created a dependent class among bums. I mean, who else uses words like bums? Created a dependent class among bums. We've created a dependent class among minority groups. And we're in the process of creating a dependent class among corporations. It's turning us into a nation of thieves. No one is more effective at conveying these simple messages that make people think twice about these things than Walter. And I'm happy to help you fight against that, and I thank you for fighting for freedom.
The average American is unattentive, apathetic, or sometimes, or most often, a party to the assault on liberties by the state. One measure of this insidious encroachment by the state is the rapid erosion of our Bill of Rights guarantees. And I would like for somebody, and I've challenged people all over the country, to tell me which of the original Bill of Rights guarantees are fully protected in the United States today.
What we find is the basic economic principle, and that is if you tax something, you're going to get less of it, and if you subsidize it, you're going to get more of it. And what we've been doing is subsidizing slovenly behavior. I am very, very happy that I got virtually all of my education before it became fashionable for white people to like black people. So what that meant is that when I got a C, it was an honest-to-God C. When I got an A, it was an honest-to-God A. They weren't practicing affirmative action, and they didn't give a damn about my self-esteem.
Here's the cure for poverty. There are about 4 things you need to do, and it's almost a written guarantee that you will not be poor. Graduate from high school. Don't have children until you're married. Take any kind of job, and stay out of jail. According to the census, only 8% of people who have that characteristic are poor.
They're going to call him a controversial professor who offended a lot of black people, and they may mention his books, but they won't talk about the profound effect he's had on so many people, black and white, who have read his books and been inspired by him.
Walter is one of the few honest academics, and it's harder to be honest in academia than in almost any other place, with the possible exception of politics.
All of your colleagues at George Mason are fortunate to have you as a colleague and friend. To them I say, treat him well. I'd trade 2, even 4 of mine for him.
On his website, Walter offers anyone of European descent a proclamation of amnesty and pardon.
I, Walter Williams, do declare full and general amnesty and pardon to all persons of European
ancestry for both their own grievances and those of their forebears against my people.
Therefore, from this day forward, Americans of European ancestry
can stand straight and proud knowing they are without guilt and thus obliged
not to act like damn fools in their relationships with Americans of African ancestry. That's wonderful.
As my dad says in this proclamation of amnesty and pardon, that's over. Pick yourself up, and it's time to do better and time to want for better.
Walter signs that proclamation on his website, Walter E. Williams, gracious and generous grantor.
I want to thank you, all of you, for your generosity in support of our efforts in making the case and trying to sell our fellow Americans on the moral superiority of personal liberty and its main ingredient, limited government. And we have to keep in mind your help in this effort is your help is vital. We must never forget that if liberty dies in America, it's probably dead for all times and all places in the world.